Show. Welcome to Black Politics Today. It's about us, and it's time for the Black Reset Town Hall series. I want to thank you guys for joining us again for another evening of insightful, impactful, and certainly what I am anticipating and know what will happen will be very enlightened information from our panelists, and I'm sure those of you who will decide and choose to call in and give us your insight and comments are certainly welcome to do that. We're looking forward to just allowing ourselves to understand exactly what's going on and what's at stake. And that's why I decided tonight, because this week, so much has been coming up and so much has been talked about and so much has been said that I think I needed to play the Wake Up Everybody song, as I sometimes do on the radio broadcast. And for those of you who join us on the radio tonight, I want to thank you for joining us. And for those of you who are watching us live on StreamYard, right here at blackpoliticstoday.com and Black Politics Today Facebook, we thank you for joining us and welcome to another time of insightful dialogue. I'm looking forward to it. And I want to first thank, again, my panelists, because each and every week when we reach out to them, they're more than happy and glad to join us either on the radio broadcast or here on the It's About Us Town Hall series. And I'm just excited and glad that they continue to be supportive of Black Politics Today, from the talk show to the town halls and the Black Politics Today magazine that our latest issue just went out last week, and some redistribution this afternoon and yesterday. So I'm excited about that as well, and want to thank everyone. And then, of course, my support staff, especially Brian Smith, who runs this show and runs the broadcast of this, and Cliff Rogers, who's also very supportive and making sure that they get everything that we're trying to do right so that it can work out for us all and everything works out good. As I noted in my email to my panelists, there's so much happening right now that I really wanted to just talk about, current events and what's going on, because it's crazy out there, folks. It is so crazy. It's out of control. And I'm not quite sure how to address it without just being frustrated about it all and without being, really upset about it all. So it's one of those things that we try to do, and we want to make sure that we put together. And so certainly I want to thank them, my staff and the panelists, and then of course you who tune in each and every week. The current events, as I said, if you have been watching for the last 3 years, 3.5 years, and certainly in the last 2 to 3 weeks, the current events have certainly exposed the clear and present danger for Black America. I mean, if you don't see it and you can't recognize it, there is literally something wrong with you. I mean, there's a few choice words I might have for you, but the reality of it is that when we look at this, if we don't catch this as Black folks, if we don't catch this as Black America, literally, we will be left behind. We'll be set back. It will literally be worse off in 2021 than it was for us in 1886, 1896, 1920, 1940, 1960. It's going to be a catastrophe, in my opinion. Black America, we are at a moment of truth where we literally need to recognize and understand who we are as a community, who we are as a people, and what we're going to do. Because sitting on our behinds is not going to work. It didn't work then, and it sure as hell ain't going to work now. I mean, Trump nominated on Saturday a judge that has publicly, scorned the Chief Justice from her own party, a Republican, right? Put that up, Brian. We're looking at this whole idea of the Affordable Care Act and what it's going to mean. 50,000 African Americans, nearly 25% have died. And it is going to be serious issues with this particular judge, because she's already said she's going to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. She said she's going to get rid of it. She didn't like it. It was wrong. He made the wrong decision, all this stuff. And an individual who has already expressed her public views about something like that and now is being considered for the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, after only being on the bench for 3 years, and under normal circumstances would not have even been considered because of her record. And she's going to be the youngest justice on the bench at 48 years old. So we got 30 years, a minimum, unless something happens, of hell to deal with based on her rulings. We can think about Clarence Thomas. That's pretty much what we got, but we have it just far, far worse than I think we did. And the impact of COVID-19 on our community has devastated us to such a degree that our children can't go back to school. Their ability to learn and be taught properly is impacted. Just the idea of us, having what they're calling now is a pre-existing condition under COVID-19 because of just the things that linger on with this virus. You have that. So impact on our education system because of COVID, impact on our health system because of COVID, and now impact of both of those because of this judge, or potentially. And what's down the line? We got the election in 35 days. And what can happen from that? So literally, everything is at stake for us. Literally, everything should be something that we should be focused on, paying attention to, and worried about. And my panelists tonight, I'm excited to have them. I'm grateful to have them. We're going to discuss that. Because one of the other things I want to talk about is for us thinking about and imagining, given the circumstances, what if we decided and what if we came together, our individual families, collectively, our organizations and our groups, and decided to do the idea of creating and recreating our Black Wall Street? What if we decided to go back and do something that was historic by recreating the Rosewood, buying up land, buying up property, and being able to do something like that? Being able to do so, establishing our own economic infrastructure so we can address our own healthcare issues, so we can address education, so we can address jobs, so we can address those things. And then what if we had Black 5-star athletes, blue chippers, decide to attend historically Black colleges and universities instead of the PWCs, instead of the Kentuckys and all those schools? What if we had our athletes decide to attend HBCUs, and then maybe we decided to go ahead and quasi create our own little NCAA of our HBCUs? If Black America decided to do that, what would become of Black America? What would happen? Because Black America, on November 3rd, it's about us. Joining me tonight to share their wisdom insight is the Nevada State Speaker of the Assembly, Representative Jason Frierson. Also joining me, coming back for us, who's been on the show a long time, a number of years, is law professor and publisher of LA Progressive, Sharon Kyle. Hopkinsville, Kentucky City Council member is Dr. Darren Adams. Darren Adams the first. Also, we have joining us from the first African-American elected sheriff in Durham County, North Carolina, is Sheriff Clarence Birkhead. I want to thank each and every one of them for joining us tonight. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you being here. And I want to thank you. You guys can mute me on your side. And I also want to bring into the broadcast our good friend who's going to be joining us later in the show. Or is he? No, he's on the show now. There we go. Mr. Bernard Perry. He is a former, go ahead there. He's a former principal at Calvary Christian Academy and former NBA and HBCU college standout for the Washington Bullets, as well as for Howard University. Dr. I'm going to give you a title named Dr. Bernard Perry, and we want to welcome him to the show as well. I'm just giving away titles tonight. I'm giving away titles tonight. So let me start with you, Sheriff. Go ahead and you guys can mute me on your phones if you have me on phones as we try to make sure that everyone can hear us. So Dr. No, Sheriff. Let me go to Speaker Frierson. Speaker Frierson, let me start with you. We got 200,000 African Americans, or 200 Americans dead. 200 Americans are dead as a result of COVID-19. Roughly about 50,000 or 25% of those are African Americans. Can you address the reality of what we're dealing with across this nation and right there in your state of Nevada? How are we going to be dealing with this, especially considering health disparities, racial disparities, income inequality, the things that are most prevalent in our communities?
Well, thank you for having me as always. I think there's so many layers of challenges to the way that the COVID pandemic is impacting the Black community. Obviously, with I think community-wide health issues within our Black community, diabetes, hypertension, obesity. I think that we have seen that we are more susceptible to a more extreme reaction to contracting COVID. What we are seeing here in Nevada, and I think in a lot of states also, is the fact that African Americans make up a larger percentage of our first responders, of our frontline workers. And so not only are we seeing, people victimized by it in the community, but our nurses and our folks in the Department of Family Services, our social workers, folks in our criminal justice system are disproportionately represented by African Americans. So we're exposed at an even greater extent. So it's been a triple whammy. It's been contacting it by being in the community, contacting it by being a first responder, and then the extra, I think, precautions that we have to take because of our heightened sensitivity if we do contract it. So it's more important to us than many communities where you can afford to be, you actually can't afford to be, but there's a perception that you can afford to be more casual with wearing masks. But I have a 7+-year-old mother who I moved a mile away that I have to care for, who's been in and out of the hospital several times over the last couple of years. So I have to be extra careful about exposing her, right, making sure that my can see their grandma, but at the same time we're sensitive to it. So I obviously it's had a large impact on makeup, a large percentage of the folks that have contracted as well as who died from COVID-related exposure. So there's never been a greater time for the American community to be paying attention and being engaged.
It really has to be that way. Dr. Adams, you're also on the front line there in Kentucky. What are some of the things that you're dealing with as you look at the exacerbation of an already broken system and recognizing that income inequality is a hard hit aspect of what happens for African Americans when we're dealing with health and education and just being able to eat right and all the things that we need to do from and economic instability and how this has increased our poverty rates and increased a lot of the things that go on in our community. What are you seeing there in Kentucky as you look at and deal with this health pandemic? Hold on one second, Dr. Adams. Dr. Adams, hold on one second because we're not able to hear you. Let me see what's happening and how we can fix that. I'm gonna come right back to you and make sure that we can try to fix that and get you on live with us here. Okay. All right. All right. Let me come back. Let me come to you, Sharon, and talk to you about it, because you, more than anyone, I think, also and education field there in LA, know the disparities are going on, and looking at how LA is dealing with it. How do we see this extreme issue? Because when you're looking at infection rates and you're looking at the rates and folks dying, and then how this impacts our education system and impacts our economic system, and where we're going to be left out, especially after this November election. Where do you think public policy needs to move to so that it can address some of these issues, with the idea that Joe Biden will be in office to do that? Because certainly we know this president cares nothing about this virus.
Right, you're right. Thank you again for having me. In California, we have a piece of legislation, Proposition 16, that's going to be on the November ballot, that was introduced by Assembly Representative Shirley Weber. She's a state Assembly representative in California. And she introduced this legislation specifically to address the disparities in education. Back 20-something years ago, there was a Proposition 209, that essentially got rid of affirmative action in higher education in the state of California. And so Dr. Shirley Weber says that the ongoing pandemic, as well as the recent tragedies of police violence, that these two things have really put a spotlight on the deep-seated inequality and far-reaching institutional failures that show that race and gender still matter. And so her goal is to have this initiative passed and to undo the inequities that were created by Proposition 209. We believe that race and gender should be considered when going through the selection process for students applying to be at the UC and the California State University system. But more than that, I want to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the general population. So when we look at it from a racial perspective, the rate of death per 100,000 for non-Hispanic whites is about 31. And these are statistics that I picked up from the CDC. So 31 people per 100,000. That the same disease impacts Black Americans at 142 per 100,000. Now, this was between the months of March and May 23rd. And the identical number is true for Native Americans. So Native Americans, 142 per 100,000 are dying, and Blacks, 142 per 100,000 are dying, compared to non-Hispanic whites, 31. And I think I'm not the only one. When I heard about this grave disparity, I believed that the President of the United States would then sort of minimize the importance and the urgency of this issue. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who wonders if one of the reasons that he has not issued a federal response to this national pandemic is that the people who are mostly impacted are people of color.
Exactly. I think I said that on one of my shows where I made mention that once the records and the numbers came out that it was African Americans who were being impacted the greatest, that it then became this idea, well, open back up the cities, open back up the states. We don't have to worry about this. We don't have to worry about that. It was one of those things where they were completely void of any way or any action of trying to say they're going to do something about it. And Sheriff Birkhead, let me come to you, because in North Carolina, there has been an uptick in your county of COVID cases. And I remember when we talked probably back in May and June, you had literally no person in your detention center sick. None of the detainees were sick. And I think you only had maybe one employee who had tested positive, and you had taken care of that. But now you've gotten a point where now your county has had an uptick, and you've had to deal with a number of cases. What more can you do, given the lack of national leadership and given the confusion coming out of the CDC? How are you able to keep Durham safe and keep your inmates and your staff safe and productive?
No, it's a very good question. And since our last conversation in May, as you noted, Kelly, we have seen an uptick here in North Carolina, unfortunately. And up until August, we had not had a single case of COVID in our facility. Right. Remarkable work by my staff, our healthcare provider, just incredible amount of work that they did day in and day out. And we still have all those protocols in place. The interesting thing about this virus is, of course, we can't see it, so we can't really attack it head on. And to keep it out of the jail for as long as we did, again, remarkable. But unfortunately, in August, we had our first case. We had a single case. One of the detainees reported to his attorney that he had lost his sense of taste and smell. And of course, we know that's one of the symptoms. Right. So we immediately tested him and everyone in his cell block, so to speak. And out of the 10 people that we tested, 9 of them came back positive. All asymptomatic, which is really worth noting. And he himself had been incarcerated for over 2 years. Wow. So it's not like he was out not wearing his mask and things of that nature. So my point is, we really don't know what we're dealing with here. Since that one case, we have tested over 290 inmates. We immediately did the mass testing. We did the cleaning. We intensified it because we had been doing it all along. Actually, since March, we had stepped up our cleaning and cut back on visitation and started issuing PPEs to all of our staff, also to all the inmates. But since then, we've tested over 290 inmates. We are set to do another round of testing beginning October 1. As of this broadcast, I'm happy to report we now have 0 positive cases once again in our facility. I've had 8 employees who have tested positive. Those 8 are now out of protocol, so back to 0 cases on my staff side. Unfortunately, we did lose, tragically, we had a senior detention officer who passed away as a result of COVID. So we know it's real. We've dealt with it, continue to deal with it day in and day out in some form or fashion. We're all impacted. But we just have to remain vigilant to keep this virus at bay as much as possible. And that's what we're committed to do here in Durham County, North Carolina.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that, because I do remember the one case that you did have, and the one instance of one of your staff and employees who had been there, I think 20 years or 20 plus years. So I remember us having that conversation, and I appreciate that. I want to bring you in, Mr. Perry, because I want to get your insight and input. When you think about it from a layperson's point of view of just not having to deal with it from a public policy side of things, not having to deal with it from a first responder side of things, but just the everyday life of what you have to go through. What has this virus done to you and changing how you actually deal with things and where you go with things, Bernard? How does it change how you live your life? Can you hear me, Mr. Perry? I don't think he's got it. Speaker Frierson. How has it changed you, even though you deal with it from a public policy standpoint? How has it changed you just in your daily life of what you're doing?
Well, first of all, it doesn't only deal with me in the public policy perspective. In Nevada, we are a part-time legislature. So for a year and a half, when we're not in session, I'm at the public defender's office. So I see the impact that it's had on my day job, the limitations on folks' access to justice. I also have a 5 and 8-year-old, and distance learning has had a huge impact. Children need to interact as part of their development. So finding safe ways to make sure that they have that kind of development, but they're also not missing a step in school, I think is key. Here in Nevada, and in particular in Clark County, we're seeing of our 320,000 students, over 20,000 that have not had any contact, meaning because we're not in school, the school district hasn't been able to identify or locate 22,000 children of color. And so it's having a huge impact on our community. It's going to exacerbate, I think, the educational divide within communities of color in particular, where we're already having challenges. So, I think it's something that we have to recognize is going to have, we're going to lose a year for education for our kids, and in particular our kids of color. And my kids, fortunately, we have extended relatives that can help make up that gap. But, whether it's free and reduced lunch for folks that are depending on it, folks that have limited access to other, relatives. We have a 24-hour town here in Las Vegas, so folks are having to work and be able to provide for distance learning. The other component, and I would imagine the sheriff could speak to this as well, folks are stuck at home. Now you have child abuse cases that are exacerbated because folks are stuck at home. You have domestic violence that's exacerbated because folks are stuck at home. So these are all things that impact our community, in particular our communities of color, to a greater extent. And we have to, continue to be adaptive and making sure that our kids don't suffer as we make adjustments moving forward in this new norm.
Sheriff, go ahead and speak to that, because that was something that I was gonna ask you once he mentioned it, about when we look at the fact that this individual in 1600 has done absolutely nothing for this, and now we're having these cases increase, and I'm sure in our community it's 10 times as much as in any other community. How are you reacting and responding to that, and what's happening?
No, it's a very good question and very valid point. We're dealing with a pandemic, obviously, but crime has not stopped. I was on a call about 3 days ago, late last week, and we talked about this very issue, how here in North Carolina, we're not going to school. Some schools are starting to do a mix of remote and back in the classroom, but we're nowhere near we should be for our children. So we're dealing with that. And incidentally, I've had to stop my learning programs in the Durham County Jail because we have over 26 programs geared to reduce the recidivism rate, and I've had to stop those because of COVID. And unfortunately, the large percentage of my population is Black and brown. So, and he's correct, and we've seen an uptick in crime. Unfortunately, Durham, North Carolina is experiencing unprecedented gun violence. So COVID, I would say for the first month, really slowed things down from a criminal perspective, but not any longer. People are getting out, tensions are getting high, domestic violence is up. People are stressing and very concerned about what the future holds. And then when you lay an upcoming election and all this national rhetoric that we continue to be fed day in and day out, people are acting out. And that's the term I'll use. People are acting out. Crime is up. And we're having to make sure that we are prepared to deal with something that we have not dealt with before.
Right.
Something we haven't seen in 100 years. So the officers are trying to look at things differently while also, Kelly, keeping themselves safe.
Right.
They too have families, and they know that the sheriff, I have mandated to wear their PPEs, and I tell him all the time. I'm reminded of what my 97-year-old mother would say. She says, he's a good boy as long as he's with me. Mm-hmm. But when we're not around, or when the sheriff is not watching, you take off your PPE and you're interacting with the public. We don't know who out there has COVID. We can't look at them and say they do or do not have COVID. So we have to be careful because we're in the community every single day.
Correct. Correct. And Sharon, when thinking about that, I think about Flint, Michigan, and the water crisis and the water issue that they had, and I know they're replacing some of the pipes, but the reality of it is this: is that you got 2 million Americans who don't have water, clean water, or running water. And you think about that at this time and how those kids are having to deal with that, and then how that will then escalate into the school issue of them being stuck at home, not having any access to clean water, to running water, no education, and like Cher said, and like the speaker said, you need that social activity of being out there. What exactly are you going to be able to do so that you can address those type of issues when you don't have the access to it? I mean, those disparities are akin to not being able to eat breakfast in the morning and going to school. How do parents and families begin to deal with something like that?
What we need really, Michael, is a radical change in the way what we expect our government to do for us, our engagement with our government, our sense of ownership, and who makes decisions. What we see here is a massive failure. When you talk about what happened with Flint, and Flint, Michigan, of course, is not the only example where we have systems that are failing the most vulnerable. Here in Los Angeles County, we have approximately 90,000 homeless people in the county of Los Angeles. This is a mega failure. And so I think that what's happened is we have to take a good hard look at the actual structures that are supposedly designed to serve the people. We need to come to terms with the fact that these systems do not serve the masses. They serve the multinational corporations. And the people of the United States, particularly the people that are most affected, need to stand up and say, this is mine. Now, what I've seen happen with the Black Lives Matter movement is there have been some minor successes in terms of change of policy as a result of so many people being in the streets. Mm-hmm. I know you noticed that the changes occurred when we had all kinds of people, when the demographics extended beyond just Black people. Then we see some changes in policy, like in the city of Los Angeles, for example. Eric Garcetti, the mayor, conceded that the budget that had originally been allocated for LAPD was going to be reduced because they're taking more of a serious look at the issues because too many people are demanding that there be a change. And I think that really that's the only answer. And when you think about the purpose of democracy, democracy is about the people, all of the people being engaged. Right. We can't sit back and let the experts handle things. When you do that, you see how they handle them. They handle them very poorly, and they take care of their friends and family.
Exactly. I'm still going to try to get you on, Dr. Adams, and Brian's helping me to work that out for you. So stand by, please. Speaker, public policy wise, what is it that you guys are able to do there in Nevada, and what do you think should be done nationwide, especially given that if this judge is confirmed, as we all know that she will be, unless something, a miracle happens, and the ACA will be overturned, what is it that public policy wise that we should be looking for or advocating for to try to make sure that responses and treatments can continue even after January?
Sure. I mean, look, in Nevada, we have expanded access. We've expanded coverage for pre-existing conditions. We have started to look at essentially a state version of the Affordable Care Act because we recognize that it's going to be chipped away at more and more. Now, no one expected, Justice Ginsburg to pass away. And so this has expedited the need to address it on a state level. So we're in Nevada going to continue to look at providing a state version, expanded access to healthcare. The challenge with respect to the state level is states cannot operate in a deficit. And so we have to balance our budgets either annually or every 2 years. When you have a system like the Affordable Care Act nationally, on a state level that has to be funded. And you have to be prepared for a catastrophic event. So if you start it, you have to have enough resources invested in it to be able to sustain a catastrophic event, like COVID, for example, which states don't have. So we have to start the process of exposing our most vulnerable communities. So in Nevada, we have Las Vegas, Clark County, Henderson, North Las Vegas, but we also have a large rural part of the state. They actually, despite them being primarily Republican counties, have a larger need and are disproportionately hit. And so we have to start by looking at our most vulnerable populations and trying to provide increased access, healthcare options for them. And as it begins to fund, expand it to cover more of your state's citizens, more Nevadans here. But that's one of the things. The other thing we continue to do on a state level is urge Congress to continue or to provide a second level of CARES dollar funding or another kind of federal aid package so that we can continue to heal and make it through this tough time. So we've been doing that. And I think what's really key is that most states, I believe, and Nevada has formed legislative subcommittees to deal with it so that we can either direct where that money goes or at least make recommendations on the kind of programs, because we are on the ground with our neighbors where the rubber hits the road. So I think those are just a few examples of the things that states are doing and have to do to get ready. This pandemic isn't going anywhere.
Right.
And a lot of experts are expecting there to be either an expansion or resurgence or second wave when the weather turns down and all of a sudden we're indoors again. I think that there's a good likelihood that we're going to have an uptick, and we have to be ready. This is going to be here for a while, and we have to start to develop the infrastructure to deal with it.
Good. I'm going to, Dr. Adams, I'm going to see if we can get you back in here and if you can hear me. Can you hear me, Dr. Adams?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, Mr. Kelly?
I can. And hopefully we can all hear you clearly. I was asking you, like, how are things working there in Kentucky, and what happens in terms of how you guys are dealing with that, dealing with the situation, and where are you in dealing with the COVID-19 and how it's impacting the school kids, as well as how it's impacting just our community as a whole in general?
Yeah, the totality of the situation here in Kentucky, Kelly, it's heartbreaking. As we stated earlier and throughout our conversation this evening, is that the combination of the COVID-19 pandemic, along with the foolishness and the demonic idolatry and the evil and so on and so forth that's going on in the White House and throughout the country, it's had a profound effect on brown and black communities, educationally, socially, politically, economically, psychologically. And so as I am a member of the city council here in Hopkinsville, I also pastor a church here in Hopkinsville in the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church tradition. So I kind of try to keep my eyes on what's going on in the spirit realm and also politically as well. I can tell you all, it's just devastating. It's a devastating reality. Of course, you all know that the state of Kentucky is part of the old school Jim Crow. It's a state that has not voted red probably in 100 years. We do have some good Democrats. We got some good Republicans as well, Kelly, but it's just difficult to navigate because there's so many different things going on at the same time, and all of which are doing destructive harm to Black folk. So the school system here is struggling real bad. We're doing the virtual learning, distance learning model, and it has some strengths and some weaknesses. A large constituency of people here in Kentucky refuse to wear masks. At the leadership of our president, there's a sharp increase in the number of people who are testing positive, a sharp increase in the number of people, Kelly, whom have died as a result of COVID-19. So like I said, it's just a difficult process to navigate on several different fronts, in particularly the economic front and the educational front as well.
And that's where I want to move to, especially the education side, but both the economic and the education, because I think with the economic side of things, we might be able to create some things and some changes on the education side of things and looking at that, because I certainly want to take and make and take note of the idea that you got 30 million Americans unemployed. A whole number of them are African American, right? So 30 million people are unemployed. We already know that 24% of the people who are dying of COVID are African American. The fact that our kids are being, kept at home from school, if we're not in a particular school district, a particular city, we don't have the broadband, the Wi-Fi, we don't have the capacity to be able to even have our kids learning from home, or we're dealing with the fact that you only have one computer at the house, but you have 2 or 3 kids at the house, and they're all trying to learn from the same device because their particular school, because of funding, has not provided and hasn't given them the tools to be able to, just be able to go and say they can pick this up and have it. So you don't have that available to them. So now you're dealing with all those things, and I want to try to transition into the idea of being able to look at how we take. I open up the town hall with the idea of us creating our own Black community, recreating Black Wall Street, trying to do a Rosewood and trying to do that. And in Georgia, you had 19 families that decided to do just that. They raised $1.2 million, and they went out and bought 100 acres outside of Atlanta. And when they did that, and many of you know that my last town hall, we talked about Black Wall Street. We talked about redesigning or redeveloping or reestablishing a Black Wall Street across the country in our communities. That was exactly what our last town hall was about: the economics of the policies and the issues impacting African Americans. And so when I saw this article was sent to me, I got excited because I said, if we can do this, and Sharon, you and I remember we talked about this, I think with Dr. Wilmer. I said, Wilmer, can we do this? And he said, yeah, you can do it with your family, get your church together, get this, and you guys can do it. And then the next day I got this article that came out, and I thought about it. I said, what if, let's hypothesize, let's put a theory together. What if we as a Black folk, as a Black community, do what we used to do back when we were slave and when we were just coming out of slavery under Reconstruction? We put it all together and we kept it all in our community, and we built our community. This particular place right here in Georgia is unincorporated. So now they're going to create their own city, get their own city, and they're going to call it Freedom, Georgia, which I thought was amazing. Looking at it from that standpoint and moving forward and thinking about it, if we were to do something like that, is it possible to be able to then build our own schools, create our own school system, create our own healthcare, not necessarily healthcare system. We can use the, Medicaid and Medicare, but we have our own hospitals. We have our own clinics, our own facilities, where we can make sure and ensure that our community, our Black community, our kids, our grandkids, our nieces, nephews, and everybody else will always have the ability to have access to that they don't necessarily get right now on an equal playing field or equal level. And I'm saying that because if I think about it from education or school standpoint, if we can create our own education system, we won't have kids who are having struggling in school right now, where they get disinterested or they decide that they don't want to go into school or they don't want to deal with it. Because, Sheriff, there is a pipeline to prisons. There is that reality that we have to deal with. And so when we look at that and we address that and we come about that, it's something that's like, oh, what is it? What's out there? Where are you? What's happening? So let me bring in Mr. Perry. You got your sound together for us, sir? Let me talk to you as a principal, a former principal, as a parent. What are your thoughts on establishing an education system, not just for school or not just schools and us, running schools or owning schools, but a whole education system to eliminate the racist educational structure that's already been put in place?
Well, I think we have the the knowledge base in place as people of color is just us getting together, the haves and the have-nots getting together to put something like that together in terms of from an educational standpoint, building our own schools. But even more than that, Kelly, until we're able to do that, we as parents, I am a parent, grandparent, we have to hold the people we have in place now in our educational systems, those who are making the laws, the principals, the superintendents, and local government accountable for our kids. I heard the panel talking about the struggles that people of color are having in the school system when you got homes that don't have the internet access, even though they may have a laptop, but they don't have enough laptops, and things of that nature. And a lot of us don't know about that. We see the county that I'm in currently in Maryland, they're giving out the laptops and things of that nature, but a lot of kids don't have. You may have a single mom at home who has to go to work, and she has more than one child, so we have to be creative in how we go about doing that. But I believe we have the resources within our communities, our large communities, to get something like that started. And I think that was a great leeway that you did for the 19 families that started their own community, or in the process of starting their own community down in Wilkins County, Georgia, I believe. Yeah. So I believe it's something that can be done. It's just a matter of fact of getting us together to get it done.
Speaker Frierson, what about that? How policy-wise and looking at education, where do we go? Because the education system that we have in America is not equal. It's not set for us. I say it all the time. I say it on the show. If I can, every show I have. This system was not built for us. We were three-fifths of a person. We were property. So they didn't expect that we was actually going to be able to get out and live. They thought we was going to be slave forever. So now that we're not, we still have to deal with that structure. So what public policy wise can we do or deal with there in Nevada and across the country?
Well, and Nevada is an interesting state because we have a lot of influx. We have a lot of folks coming and going. We're less than 10% African American as a state. I think what's different today than years ago when we had a movement where African Americans were the Black Wall Street. I think what we have different now is the ability to reach out not only beyond our community lines, our state lines, our country's lines. I think that our economy now is an international one, and we have internet capabilities to be able to rely on that. But what we're seeing is an appropriation of Black culture that we've never seen before to this degree, not only in this country, but across the world. And so it's popular now. Hip hop has taken off. I think Black culture, not just hip hop, R&B, food, hair, style, I think everything is starting to expand. So while I think it's wonderful for us from a policy perspective to create an infrastructure where minority-owned business and women-owned businesses can get a start, that we can be put on a competitive level with other businesses and industries that have kind of had generations of an advantage. But I think that we need to look at, for example, the educational system. And I am not, I'm perfectly fine with a broad cultural education system so long as we incorporate our history and our contributions in it, so that we're not only teaching each other, our own kids and our grandkids, our history and our value and our contributions, but that we're teaching other cultures that we are valuable and that we contributed to what we have today. I am encouraged by what I see in social media when I see so many people who don't look like me standing up for this cause. I've never seen it to this degree. And while we can't depend on it, I think that we have to continue to advocate for our own communities and our own families. I think that the benefit of expanding that to make sure that we're incorporating our culture and our contributions into the education system for everybody is what's going to change the next generation. Right now, you have you have racists, you have folks that don't embrace culture, that don't embrace Black Lives Matter, but you have their children who do. And I think that that's what we can't lose sight of, because what we need to do is expand this so that the next generation recognizes how immoral where we're going right now, and certainly under this White House administration, where we're going, and that we have to reverse that and go in a different direction. And I think we don't have to do it together. I think that we can do it, but I think that it will last, and we will expand our ability to grow if we do it in a way that recognizes the value in those relationships outside of our own culture, so long as they embrace ours.
Well, I agree, and I think it's always been my opinion that everybody's wanted to be like us all the time, every time. I mean, especially style and music, and you have suburban white boys riding in low riders with the 40-inch speakers in their trunk, booming louder, and then you got the brothers doing it. I mean, come on now, so, they all around, so they doing it, and I mean, the fact that you can have I can't think of her name right now, and wanting to be Black and change herself, and so she can get into Howard and go to Howard, and now you have a professor at American University who's been claiming she's been Black for 20 years and as white as the darn wall. And it's like, how do you do this? But yet you're discriminating against us. You want to be us, but you don't want us to be able to have the access that you have, because you can easily switch it whenever you want to and decide that, oh, I'm white here, but I want to be Black over here. Let me bring in, she is the former CEO of Paul Public Charter School, and she is the current Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer at KIP DC, one of DC's charter enterprises. And this is Jamie Dunham. She's joining us tonight as well. Jamie, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Good
All right.
evening.
Great. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for helping me out tonight and join us, because I wanted to get the charter school aspect of what we're doing and talk to you about that, because the idea and the premise, as I shared with you, you weren't able to join us earlier, but a group in Georgia purchased 100 acres of land, and they're going to build their own city. And my theory and question and topic was, if we were to take advantage of that, if Black folks across the country decide to get with their family and go back to Georgia's, North Carolina's, Maryland's, wherever it is, and purchase land and be able to build our city and build a community, how different and how much more equitable would it be for us to then be able to establish our own school system, our own education system, not just running the schools or being in charge of the schools, but actually having a system created for us and our children, and how impactful that would be as we eliminate the disparities, or could we eliminate the disparities, and being able to teach our children so that we have kids who aren't interested, who learn in different aspects or different ways. How can we impact them if we're able to create our own system coming out of that charter school and using the charter school programs? Because as I remember back when I was bringing my son to Paul, the charter schools, they, especially here in DC, you were able to start a charter school pretty much in anywhere you wanted to, and teach almost anything you wanted to, and you're getting state dollars from it. So talk to me about that. How impactful could that be for our community?
Well, I think the charter movement definitely has a space for those that want to start their own, make their own decisions, develop their own curriculum. One misnomer, though, is that that many, I'm glad you pointed out, that many forget about, is the fact that charter schools are public schools, and so they receive public funding.
Right.
So there's a lot of autonomy around, again, curriculum, who you hire, what your day looks like, but you still receive public dollars. So that means that there's still some accountability. And the era that we're in right now is this high stakes testing accountability. So the idea that charters could exist outside of this institution that is still tied to federal dollars is still where the trickiness lies. Now, I think there's still power in us designing a program that affirms our kids. And I think the opportunity for us to design a program that is for a different purpose. The purpose of schooling for decades has been, was preparing workers. And perhaps some may want to say that the purpose of schools now is, to continue democracy. I think one question we're grappling with is how can the purpose of schools be, especially for populations of color, be really about liberation, which again is super hard to do unless you disrupt some of the traditional systems we've had in place. And many of those systems are still tied to dollars that make it very difficult to do. Without them, they make it very difficult to do some of the basic things you would want to do in a school. But I think the concept is one that would lead us in the right direction. I think we've had examples of that with charter founders that are Black that were thinking about designing and designing a program that validates and affirms our kids, that puts in front of them text, literature that represent, our intellects, our great authors, and really moving away from a Eurocentric curriculum. But the tricky part is trying to do something like this still within an institution that is built on racist practices. And so that's where we have to have our counterparts along with us that are disrupting and that have committed to being anti-racist practitioners as well. So I think it's possible. I think it's great to consider, but we'd have to do some more disrupting as it relates to making sure those dollars also are there to support us.
Sheriff Birkhead, she talks about that system, that structure that we're talking about, and where it is, and thinking about it from the standpoint of what I mentioned, that pipeline that goes from the school to the prison, and the idea that from that testing that she also mentioned, the third and fourth graders, they start testing them then and figuring out exactly if they're on grade level, if they're not on grade level. If they're not on grade level, then they start building prisons based on how many people ain't on grade level and where they're going to go. And then they come up and end up in your facility. Talk to us about that structure and how we end up seeing you rather than seeing Speaker Frierson, where we could be doing much better seeing him and Sharon and Perry and Dr. Adams rather than coming to see you.
No, it's a great question. And let me just say so many great comments have been made here. And I'm sitting here on pins and needles wanting to jump in.
Jump in anytime. Anybody, jump in anytime. When you got a comment, just come on and say it.
So what I'll say to that, you're absolutely correct. What we need to do is really to see more people like the men and women you have on this panel, like myself, the first African-American sheriff of Durham County, so we can begin to reform the system. I heard Miss Sharon say earlier, let's not talk about defunding, but let's talk about reframing. And I like to use the term of reimagining law enforcement. And I do support criminal justice reform. I've been a cop. I've been a law enforcement professional for 36 years. And yes, I'll be the first one to stand out front and say the system is broken. The system is unfair. And we need individuals like the collective on this call tonight to get in these positions and start making the changes that we know desperately need to be made. And as it relates to our schools, the first thing I did in taking office was get with my school superintendent, and we talked about the SRO program. I'm an advocate of keeping the SROs in schools, but here we go. Let's reimagine what the SROs do, how they interact with our kids day in and day out. Let's just not focus on the adversarial relationships that we've established over the years, and we've had some huge failures with SRO programs. But let's flip it upside on its head. Let's flip the script on them, as the young folks say, and really talk about building relationships at grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, and talking to them about good citizenship and just really becoming partners in the educational process and not the adversaries that many schools have made the SROs out to be. So that's what we're doing here in Durham County. There's been a push here to remove the SROs. I, along with the superintendent, are pushing back because we have great SROs. We have great relationships.
Let me interrupt you right
there.
Go ahead. I mean, as an African-American male and knowing what's happening in the school system and seeing how SROs have been treating, how do you balance that? Because I know I have a law enforcement background, my father, my brother, but there's a reality. Once I left the force, I was just another brother on the street. I really wanted to say, but I'm trying to be nice. I'm just that boy on the street. So how do you deal with that? Because you've been in this business 30 years. Now you're the sheriff. Now you control the county. And I'm sure you're getting a lot of pushback from Black folks saying, no, they need to be out because they just beat up my kid last week.
Right. And the way I approach that situation, I get it all the time. You're absolutely correct. Just like I say, not everyone can wear this uniform, wear this badge, and be the police or be a deputy sheriff. And there are specialties within law enforcement, and SRO is a specialty. Mm-hmm. You can't just stick a jarhead off the street and put them in a school. So we have a very strict selection process. There's mandatory statewide training. There's reevaluation. We have an early warning system to see if too many complaints are coming in or if the behavior's not where it should be. We immediately pull that SRO out of the schools. So it's up to the superintendent, it's up to the supervisors, and ultimately it's up to the sheriff to make sure we have the right men and women working with our kids while they're in school. And our ultimate goal is to keep that educational environment safe and secure. Again, not to be the disciplinarians. When you have a kid that's acting out in class, don't call the SRO. We need to empower our teachers and our principals and our teacher aides to handle that situation unless it becomes violent or threatening or things of that nature. Let me tell you, when I became the sheriff, this is immediately we started doing this. 2019 to 2020, we made 14 arrests in school, and the number was triple that previously. Okay, 96% of our encounters that needed to be referred were referred to the school disciplinary policy. Only 14 arrests, and these were arrests from sexual assault, weapons on campus, threatening, aggravated assaults, and drug dealing. So I'm not talking about someone refusing to pick their head up off the desk, and didn't raise their hand to get a hall pass to go to the bathroom.
I got a video I'm going to show, not yet, Brian, but I got a video I'm going to show that deals just with that. But I'm gonna go back to Jamie real quick, because in your new position, Jamie, you're dealing with being able to recruit and basically deal with equities and making sure that you're dealing with the equities within your school system. Talk to me real quick about that and how's that working out, and what does that mean for our education system of Black kids?
Yeah, this is something that we're really digging into, and essentially our aspiration is to be an anti-racist organization that educates students in the most diverse and equitable and inclusive environment possible. And so that means we are looking at our reshaping mindset. So of all of our educators, from security to teachers to principals to finance folks, everybody, not only reshaping mindsets, but rethinking our policies with an equity lens and our practices. And so if we think about those three things, what does that take? So for us, what we're doing is, first of all, we all have to be learners in this. We all have to unpack, because we're working in an institution that has been racist, that has been inequitable for our kids since conception.
Right.
And so in order to do something different, we have to identify those things that are racist and then disrupt them and then recreate and rebuild. And so that requires all of us to learn. The second thing is, as we think about our policies that then drive our practices, we have to identify, like, where are those gaps?
Right.
As we look at some of the policies around, like, who are we hiring to put in front of our kids? What are
Right.
the policies around what classes kids have to take? And then our practices. And so just like Sheriff said, a teacher has to be trained and have pedagogy that reflects culturally relevant practices. And so if a student, if a student is disrespectful or defiant, well, what does that mean? Is this student frustrated? That's not
Right.
something to get an officer about. Like, that takes a relationship, and that teacher being trained to build a relationship, a trusting relationship with a student, to then be able to unpack that frustration and then move on. So we're looking at mindsets, practices, policies, and some of the tangible things are curriculum, our discipline practices, our hiring practices, our professional development opportunities for everybody. So those are a few of the things that we're working on. But the big goal is to be able to really disrupt and rebuild with equity in mind, and making sure that at the center of everything we're doing, because we serve 99% Black students in KBC, and so our kids being at the center, and their identities being affirmed and validated all day, every day.
Dr. Adams.
Let me jump in right quick.
Go ahead.
No, he is absolutely spot on. And we teach our SROs, and we involve our students in restorative justice practices. So if there's a situation between students, we have teen court, we have restorative justice practices and counselors on hand. Again, the SRO may be inserted into that situation, but we make sure that our SROs are aware of the resources that are available to our students, to our kids. So once again, we don't perpetuate that school to prison pipeline. And all of our deputies here, 69% of our deputies here are CIT certified. So they recognize when a young man or a young woman are going through a crisis where they have been traumatized at home or on the street or even at school. So we spend a lot of time trying to connect with these young people so that we can sort of understand or detect when their behavior has shifted and drill down a little bit deeper to find out why, and then refer them to the proper resources. So absolutely spot on. I just wanted to jump in on that.
That's fine. Please, go ahead.
Can I jump in here? Yeah, so I wanted this conversation, it's a great conversation, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for everybody that's on this call. But what we've been doing is discussing symptoms of a much deeper problem. And the problem really is directly connected to economics. You know, back in 1971, there was a future Supreme Court justice who wrote a memo to the Chamber of Commerce. In 1971, Justice Lewis Powell, he wasn't a justice at the time. It was in 2 weeks after he wrote the memo, he did become a justice. But he was a right-wing conservative who was disturbed about the victories from the civil rights era. He was disturbed about the victories from the anti-Vietnam War protesters, the women's movement, the Equal Rights Amendment, the Voting Rights Amendment. He thought that America was on the wrong track. And he wrote a memo indicating how to get America back on the right track. And if you were to look at his memo, and anybody can Google this memo, it's called the Powell Memo. It's an 8-page treaty. It talks about how the conservative movement can undo the victories that we had in the 60s and the early 70s. And they've done just that. So now all of us here are sitting around having a conversation about the symptoms of this deep, dark illness, which is to take away the power of the people, to put that power in the hands of multinational corporations. I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up, we didn't have any law enforcement officers in our public schools. We didn't have a situation where both parents had to work and it was impossible to even have an apartment. Here in Southern California, the average person, the average apartment is like, I think it might be $2,500 a month. So the kinds of things that you're talking about, where we have to have law enforcement in the schools, we're characterizing students as being defiant, all of these are symptomatic of much deeper economical issues in this country. And until we address those, we will forever be on the outskirts trying to clean up the symptoms. It's like having cancer and only addressing the symptoms of the cancer, but not getting radiation or chemo, or only getting Band-Aids.
And that's
we got to look at the symptoms.
When address the whole idea of recreating Black Wall Street, or having the economics, or developing that economic structure. Dr. Adams, you wrote an article in our June issue of Black Politics Today magazine, and it's a very good article, and I encourage everyone to go check out that article, read that article, subscribe to Black Politics Today magazine at blackpoliticstoday.com, and click on the magazine issue, get your annual subscription. In that article, you talked about, one of the quotes you made, you said, it can be argued with demonstrative certainty that education is an issue of Black political significance when classroom teachers, academic counselors, school principals, community college instructors, college professors, and program administrators take every opportunity to keep our young people away from intellectual development and educational environment. The educational environment has turned politically racist. Talk to me about that, and given that analysis, what is the impact on Black community as a result of that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kelly, and I want to kind of bring together the moral fabrics of the previous statements that were made in terms of placing great importance on the root causes of racism, root causes of poverty, root causes of economic deprivation, root causes of economic oppression amongst Black and brown communities in the United States. But for me, Kelly, and I'm going to get there, give me just a few seconds. I want to kind of look a little bit deeper, is that when it comes to Black folk in the United States, you can't talk about education without talking about economics. And you can't talk about economics without talking about education, because they are both inextricably intertwined into the holistic fabric of Black existential life. And so when I wrote that particular article, I was thinking along the lines of the way that Black folk have been mistreated. My background is in theology. I hold a PhD in systematic theology from Northwestern University, Chicago, and my dissertation was basically about the narrative strand of Black poverty in the United States. And so what I was getting at, what I was attempting to argue for the Kelly, is that late capitalism, a period following the end of World War II on up into the contemporary era, late capitalism has attempted to destroy the existence of Black people, whether it be Black on Black crime, police brutality, racism, poverty, political leadership, educational advancement, so on and so forth. The totality of every single thing that we experience has what the white man would consider an inferior people. It's all really kind of encapsulated into this reality that we were brought here poor. We've been poor since we've been here, and we've continued to be poor. Whether it's post-civil rights, the industrial area, the agricultural area, post-industry, post-modernity, whatever you look at the end of the day, Black folk have been pushed back educationally, especially in the public school sector, especially when it comes to funding for our schools. Separate, it is not equal. It's been there. It hasn't gone anywhere. The ghost of modernity, the ghost of the civil rights movement continues to do great harm to Black folks. So I don't think that this conversation is pushing us back in any kind of way. I think that we all have our individual and collective concerns, but I think we're moving in the right direction. The young lady made a great point. It's that, we don't want to spend too much time on the symptoms and the sicknesses that are associated with Black existence in the United States. But certainly when you talk about the oppression of Black folk and how we endure and how we experience what's being done to us, economics and education both go hand in hand. And what late capitalism has done to Black folk is that it has destroyed both economically and education. Anybody know with good sense is that education is a gateway for Black folk to amass wealth. You know, everybody's not a professional athlete. Everybody doesn't make millions of dollars and so on and so forth. So we have to look at other ways and other avenues to continue to push our agenda forward, both economically and educationally speaking. But certainly, Kelly, and I'm done here, education is a political issue in the Black community. And I'm hoping and praying that when we go to the polls in November to vote, we will keep both economics and education in mind, and along with health insurance, because those are the preeminent issues that we should be looking at during these very, very difficult times in the pandemic 19 and the structural evil of Trumpism.
I see you, caller. Mr. Perry, let me come to you because you are or were a principal and you were an athlete. And so you have both of those things that Dr. Adams speak of. And the idea that, you know, a lot of people coming in, you know, are trying to make it into the league or do certain things and think that's the gateway out. But if you get hurt, as we both know, you get hurt and you don't have an education background, you out in the street, you're left. So as opposed to talking about the symptoms as Dr. Adams and Sharon was talking about, let's look at solutions and understanding the root cause is economic. How do we deal with that? Because most athletes, especially going into college, which we're going to talk to in a minute, most folks who are going into college, especially young Black, are dealing with the economic system, and the NCAA is not necessarily friendly to us, except when they want to exploit us.
Well, being a former athlete, and you know, when you have a dream, just like, you know, all the panelists on here, whatever their dreams were growing up, one of my dreams was to be in the NBA. Unfortunately for me, when I was in the process, you know, I was blessed to get drafted by the Washington Bullets. But in the process of making that money, I blew out my left ankle. And I think I heard one of the panelists was talking, I don't know if anybody ever mentioned mentoring young people in school, athletes, and just to make sure that they have a plan outside of professional sports, to make sure that that there's other things that they can do. And my plan was to get my degree to make sure, you know, that I could take care of myself if something happened. Even though my focus was on playing in the NBA, I had people around me who poured into me, who made sure that I was able to reach my goals. And I think it's important because I'm also in the school system here in Prince George's County, and I go out of my way to talk to young men and women who are talented athletically and even academically to make sure that they understand what their responsibilities are to themselves and to our community. I agree with our panelists in terms of racism and economically. You mentioned the NCAA. NCAA makes billions of dollars, and we all know the majority of those athletes are African-American boys and girls, not just basketball, football as well. And so I think just making sure that in our school system, even in our churches, I'm a minister as well in my church, that we are constantly having the opportunities and setting ourselves up to mentor, to talk to our young people, not when they're not, I'm not saying when they're 17 and 18, when they're 5 and 6 and 7. So when they get 16 and 17, you've built, someone mentioned relationships, and that is critical to our young people. Relationships. I have relationships to this day from people when I was 16 and 15, and I was at Howard University with some of my professors and obviously all of my coaches. But I believe the relationships with our kids and even talking to their parents. I've met with parents of kids who have athletic ability to help them to navigate that process. And I think, you know, that's some of the things that have been missing. Because a lot of times when you're in poverty and you don't have, and you see the opportunity that people are taking advantage of you, if we look at a young man such as LeBron James, whatever your feelings are about him as in terms of as a person or an athlete, he had a single mom. It was his mentors who helped guide him, even though he didn't go to college. He will tell you, he will mention his coaches, some of his teachers. It was the mentors that helped guide him. And so we need to make sure that we're putting those things in place in our school systems and our communities, and that we're actively engaged with these young men and women at an early age, and even in the middle stages when they're trying to make decisions. Because I don't know an 18 and 19-year-old kid, if they have to make the decision on their own, is not going to try and make $1 million to play sports. I don't know of one, so they need guidance in doing those things. And so I've been blessed in that. And so I try and give it back all the time the way it was given back to me. And so we have to be intentional and talking to our young people at an early age, even in the middle, our high school kids. I have a high school granddaughter that I'm constantly talking to. So I think we have to be intentional in building relationships with our students, with our children, but also with their parents as well. Because my mother made the decision for me to go to Howard. I didn't make the decision. If I had made the decision because of my thinking at 18 years old, I was going to the University of UNC Charlotte, or I was going to Iowa State. I was not coming to Howard until my mother stepped in. And I'm a mama's boy, and I did what my mother told me to do, and I'm thankful that I did that.
Perry's a mama's boy. Let me go to my caller right here. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
Yeah, I was just going to say, how many thousands of young players had to be expedient in order to produce one LeBron James or Kobe Bryant? Nobody never considered that. And as far as what's taught, Missouri is a conservative state, a red state. And this Missouri state statute, as it applies to curriculum, textbooks, and other instructional material, it says, notwithstanding provision of section 160514, the State Board of Education and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education shall not be authorized to mandate and are expressly prohibited from mandating the curriculum, textbooks, or other instructional material to be used in public schools. So that means that the parents in these school districts, that's their authority to put whatever they want for their children. And another thing, that state is a school choice state, which this president has pushed very, very hard to give parents the right to put their children where they want to have them. So that has to be considered and respected. And it just kind of disturbed me sometimes when I hear people trying to persuade people how to vote, but you can do that. But that's what it is. And here's another point. How is it that these Nigerians and Ghanaians from Africa, first and second and third generation, how is it that they perform so well not only in your schools, but also when it comes down to educational attainment and household income, they outperform whites and Asians. And they just as black as Wesley Snipes. Should they not be explored to see exactly how they do it? 40% of your male population in your Ivy League colleges are Nigerians. How do they do this? And you read article after article that black college students are overrepresented in low-paying majors. Now, I don't blame the students, but where they're coming from is not preparing them. Parents and the society seemingly don't give a care.
Well, let me go to Speaker. Thank you, caller. I appreciate you calling and sharing your thoughts.
Speaker Frierson, about them Nigerians.
Speaker Frierson. Well, you already did, so I'm just going to let him respond. Speaker Frierson, go ahead and address that and talk to us about. Just go ahead and respond to his comment.
Well, thank you, Kelly. I mean, first of all, I really wanted to revisit the notion of including parents with college-bound athletes. I had a similar experience. I played Division I football at University of Nevada, Reno, and blew my knee out as well. But when the coaches came to talk to me to recruit me to go to college, my mother, having had an older son and nephews that played at a higher level, had the wherewithal to pull the coach aside and explain to him, "You are taking away my baby, my youngest, and I need assurance from you that you're going to be responsible and look out for him when he's hundreds of miles away." And they never forgot that. That was in 1988. To this day, that coach and my family are still in touch because my mom had the wherewithal. But I think that there needs to be more effort at educating parents about what their kids are about to experience culturally and financially. We've talked, in recent years in particular about how the NC2A has been able to benefit from the likeness of all these athletes without them being able to share in that. And I do firmly believe, my concern with how you do it, I think is going to be something that needs to be discussed. But some of the wealth that's generated from this needs to be set aside at the very least, so these athletes can finish their education and have something to look forward to. Now, I was fortunate to not have brain injuries, but I got several surgeries on my knees and shoulders. And so, I always joke, I can run if a dog is chasing me, but that's about it. Well, I invested in that university, and they should be invested in my future just as well. So I do believe that there's work to be done. I think we need to include parents in that regard, and make sure the parents are educated as well, so that I was a mama's boy just the same, and I was going to listen to my mother more than a lot of folks. So let's make sure that these parents are given, I think, an educational background on what their children are about to go through as well. As for the Nigerian experience, I think that's a whole nother show, Kelly. I mean, I think culturally, immigrants who come here for different reasons and have different aspirations. But looking within our own culture, I think that we need to focus on making sure that our children have goals that get them out of their situation, but that they have options, so that if that one goal doesn't work out, that they're ready for plan B. When I had my surgery, I will never forget this. It was Dr. Clarence Shields, who I believe was a professional sports doctor at the time in the early 90s. And he said to me, "I heard you're a pretty decent student, and maybe you should focus on that." And I was pissed off admittedly when he said that. I was angry because I wanted to play football. But I remembered that a couple of years later when it was time for me to let it go. And it really encouraged and helped me focus on what my next plan was going to be. And that
Jamie, let me come to
basket.
you and have you chime in on that as well.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to go back to was the curriculum piece, and for so long there have been just a few voices deciding what gets put in front of our kids. I think Texas is like the largest textbook producer. I'm from Oklahoma, so we have a nice rivalry with Texas. Go Sooners! But that is frightening to think of the amount of Black and brown students who are being miseducated, in addition to those that we are not pouring enough resources into to actually, that are more so uneducated. But I think the idea of including diverse perspectives around curriculum and inviting our parents into the conversation. I think often what I've seen happen in especially low income communities, parents are called when there's a disciplinary issue, but they are not invited to the discussion when it comes to what courses should we offer? What would you like for your child to learn? What are the strengths your child has? Let me get to know your child better by talking to you and having a relationship with you. We often feel like parents are a burden. And so then we also see, because some of our parents have not had good experiences with the traditional schools that failed many of our parents as well, then they are not comfortable with, sometimes, you hear, oh, parents aren't showing up or parents don't care. Yes, they do. Parents care. And so that's another manifestation of just how we failed. The institution of education has failed for generations, but we do the blaming. And to our other panelists' point, we started just talking about the symptom and not getting to the root cause of what is the reason why our parents don't feel like they are empowered to advocate for their kids around what they're being taught. And so I think that's I can't speak. I agree with the gentleman who said the Nigerian piece is a whole another concept, but I feel like curriculum is a place
we don't need to worry about that. That's just like saying Asians
right now.
Right. That's like saying the Asians come here and everything else. Sheriff, talk to us about the reality of what we were discussing, or what we were leading up to with this conversation is this pipeline that goes into prison, where we can't get our kids to college because they get diverted to the penal system. You know, address that again for me, that you were talking about it earlier, because I want to get that idea of stopping that threat. Like Sharon said, we're not talking about the problem and the judge, but hit that for me one last time, and succinctly making the point of how we stop that and move forward beyond the SROs in the classroom.
No, I think Sharon is correct. We have to talk about the economics. We have to talk about the poverty. We have to talk about the trauma that we know that our kids are experiencing in our neighborhoods, and in the home. So we have to talk about all of that. And what it really takes for me, Kelly, Michael, is we have to have a serious conversation about criminal justice reform. As I mentioned earlier, we can't talk about defunding. That's just a rallying cry. It has no meaning. Since 1829, I believe it was, first Metropolitan Police, it's not going anywhere. But what we can do is reimagine law enforcement, reimagine criminal justice. And as it relates specifically to schools, we have to talk about education from a holistic approach. And if SROs are a part of it, as they are here in North Carolina, we need to be in the conversation to talk about the educational process, not talk about the disciplinary process. 5 years ago, some of the Durham schools were dinged by the federal government for having a high suspension rate, off the charts. We got a new superintendent, got a new sheriff. Those numbers are dramatically reduced and will continue to go down because we are thinking differently about how we engage with our children, how we teach our children. And it is critically important that we bring the parents into this conversation, or the grandparents into this conversation, because we know a lot of our kids are being raised by grandparents. So we have got to get them to the table before I get them in the jail or in my squad room where they're being interviewed. And we can't wait. I think it was said earlier, we can't wait until they're 16, 17 years old. Again, we have to have these conversations at 3 and 5, elementary school, and have real conversations about life choices, not about
but
life choices.
Right. So let me go with you, Sheriff, with Speaker Frierson, with Sharon. All of you are educators and have been in the education system at some point. Perry, Jamie, and Dr. Adams. Each one of you have been in this process. So I want to talk about the idea of the historical Black, or the HBCU system, being established for us, and then recognizing that a lot of our students are going away from the HBCUs, but then going to the PWCs, right, to where they can, either for athletics, especially for athletics, primarily for athletics, but also for academics. And looking at the idea of what I put out there, saying, what if we talked about removing ourselves, a quasi NCAA of HBCUs, where all the blue chippers, the 5 stars, are going to the HBCUs, like Maker. What's the kid's name? Maker. Here we go. Yeah,
Maker
Maker. So he's committed to Howard University. Jamie went to Howard, I believe, and then of course Bernard Perry went to Howard, and then other blue chippers are now starting to go. One's going up to Morgan State, another one's going out to I think FAMU, and a few others. I'm gonna come to you, Perry, on this one as a former athlete. Talk to me about the idea of them coming to these universities, because back in the day, this is where everyone went. They came to these universities because they couldn't get into the PWCs, and they still made it to the league. But if we can harness this talent, we can then create an economic wealth stream, I believe, to the HBCUs, which then will also help them grow and then make them the powerhouse of receiving these huge endowments like all these PWCs do. You know, I think Howard is the top university, and I think its endowment, it gets us $3 million a year, whereas these other schools get $100 or $50 or $30 million a year, and Howard, being the top of all the HBCUs, only gets $3 million a year. Is that possible? Can we do that? And Jamie, I want you to follow up because of the system of structure, how that works, and then Sharon, I want to come to you.
Well, I believe this kid. I had the opportunity to meet him, and I can't stress enough the importance that parents play. Our coach, Coach Blakeney, has a relationship with his family. It's relational, and I believe the climate that we're in, with the racism that's going on, you call out a few kids. There are a couple of other blue chip kids who are considering HBCUs, not just basketball, but football, that have signed. We have Deion Sanders, who is now Jackson State's football coach, and you've had kids who have already decided to transfer from the bigger schools to go to Jackson State. I believe I don't think it's just a fad. I think it's going to be something that's going to continue. They're just going to look at the success of this kid. And right now it's going to be difficult because we're in COVID. But I believe it's happening to a lot of HBCUs, but I believe he's probably the marquee player. But other HBCUs have gotten 5-star athletes on football, basketball as well. And so I don't think it's a one-time thing. I don't think it's right. I think it's something that's going to be ongoing, and it's just going to bring more attention to these universities from a marketing standpoint, from a recruiting, not just for athletes, but for students as well.
Exactly.
I think it's something that's going to continue. It's just once we get them, we got to make sure that we have the resources to maintain those type of athletes, those just like we do academically. We have to make sure that we can maintain for those students who are gifted academically, the ones that we're giving academic scholarships to. So we're excited. I'm excited not just for Howard, but for Jackson State, for North Carolina A&T. Right. I'm excited for all the HB, for Morgan State. Right. They got a couple of kids that are going up there. And so it's going to change the landscape of college athletics because just like you said, back in the day, that's where everybody was going. And so I believe that's where we're headed. And we just got to be able to maintain it with our resources but I believe it's relational. I still believe it comes down to going to that house. I think like one of the other panelists said, being able to talk to that mom or that dad or that grandma to kind of pull everything together. So I'm excited about it, man. I really am.
Jamie, how do we do it economically?
Wow, that's a tough one. I was going to go on. I think it starts before that, Kelly, with messages. I think, a kid doesn't, fill out the college application, with a blank slate about what they think about colleges and which universities are good universities versus the ones that aren't so good. And I think the messages around anti-Blackness have been real and powerful for a very long time. And so we have to start very early countering that with the positive messages about who we are as a people, so that we don't feel like our students don't feel like an HBCU is, plan B. It should be the top plan because of not only what it can compete with predominantly white universities and colleges, but because it is the place where we can pour into us and have generational impact.
Right.
Because of that. So economically, I think it's going to take the messages and the realization that what we have is just as powerful and just as important, and that in doing that, as others follow those who are making that decision, we're able to see success, turn that success into pouring into and reinvesting in that success, and being able to just multiply that. That's where I think we also have to just start with being able to show examples. In schools for a long time, all we did was show examples of the great Black leaders who were dead and gone. Who definitely we should know who they are, but there's so many living models of excellence that our kids have to know they're doing things right now. our kids can emulate to, and that are graduating from these great, HBCUs.
And Sharon, if we do that, do you see and do you think, as a professor yourself, that the dollars will come, that we can attain and we can attract the media, that we can attract the people because we have the athletes and we have the academic infrastructure?
Right. So whenever I think about forecasting for the future, I like to look at the past. And in the past, we have had success in this area, particularly when we were coming out of slavery. And we look at people like Mary McLeod Bethune or Booker T. Washington, both former slaves. What they were able to accomplish was just nothing short of a miracle. So we do have the wherewithal now. We have much more resources today. And in fact, when you consider the athletes, some of these athletes that are going to be going in, become NBA players, have parents who themselves were also NBA players. So like LeBron James has a son who is an up and comer, and so does Dwayne Wayne has a son who's up and comer. So, and we have Black Hollywood. We have a whole Black middle class that we did not have when Mary McLeod Bethune or Booker T. Washington were establishing Tuskegee University. So yes, I believe that this is a perfect storm. This is a time for this to happen.
Speaker Frierson, are there policies out there, or is there measures that we can take or that can be given so that we can have these HBCUs better economic and financially footed? Or is it just a matter of the enrollment and then trying to get dollars from boosters and from alumni and other areas? How can we do this in a policy manner?
Well, look, I think we can always help from a policy perspective, making it easier. It's incredibly difficult to contribute to education these days. There are all kind of loopholes that make it much more difficult. But I also want to be careful not to depend on folks on the outside for what I believe that we can provide for our own community. So I think the more that alumni, even if it's lower amounts, it doesn't have to be $1 million endowment, but even if alumni are encouraged and incentivized to provide more support so that we can eventually have more scholarships accessible. I think a lot more athletes that want to go to an HBCU than the scholarships are available to provide for them. So I think the more that we engage, with our alumni, and it doesn't have to be alumni. There are plenty of folks that are supportive of HBCUs that aren't alumni. I think we can start. We have to start somewhere. And then develop, I think, not only money for athletes to be able to get scholarships, but also to be able to continue to hire and retain quality coaches. Not every HBCU is going to be able to get a Sanders. And so I think those are the things that matter. Those are the coaches that know to connect with parents, that assure parents that they're going to take care of their children. Those are the athletes that come and have a sense of pride in an HBCU, whereas many of us would otherwise go somewhere just because we got a scholarship. So, I think it's a collective of all of those things. There are certainly policies that will make it easier to contribute to education efforts, but we can't be overly dependent on that.
So, in the last few minutes we have, I want to go ahead, Perry. Is that Perry?
Yeah. Just to touch on the economic piece of the sports aspect of things. If you look at it, what could happen, and what I'm hoping happened for these HBCU, when you go to the first round of the NCAA, your school is guaranteed a certain amount. You get in the top 8, your school is guaranteed money. You get into the sweet top 4, you win it, you're guaranteed millions of dollars for your school. And if you're constantly going, though, that also can help you economically, athletically, for professors. If you look at a program of Duke, even though Duke has an outstanding educational program, but when people think of Duke University, the first thing most people think of is the basketball program.
Right.
They're constantly in the NCAA Final Four winning championships. They bring so much money into the university. And so I'm hoping that this will happen to the HBCUs, and particularly my own alma mater, Howard University. But for the HBC, I believe that can be part of the economic impact for these universities when you start getting these top tier athletes into your schools.
Right.
Kelly, Mike, can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah.
Just real quick. And I put a comment in the chat about HBCUs, colleges and universities have to be intentional about developing funding sources. I remember reading an article maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago, or maybe longer. Dr. Dre gave a lot of money to a white institution, can't remember the name, but he was asked in that article, why did you not give this money to a Howard or to a North Carolina Central or to an HBCU? He simply said, no one asked. We have to be intentional about developing those relationships and asking. And we can't miss that point. And so we've got millionaire entertainers and athletes, and we have to ask to them, but we also have to build a product. I've been an adjunct professor at North Carolina Central University, Eagle Pride. I teach on the community college level, have done so for a number of years. So we cannot leave out our community colleges either, because not everyone is built to succeed at a 4-year institution.
Right.
So we've got to talk about how do we direct our young men and women who are not the 4-star, 5-star athletes to community colleges where they can still get that educational foundation. And we have to be intentional at that level as well. Just wanted to jump in there.
No problem. I want to go to Darvin, Dr. Adams, real quick here, because we winding down, but I got to get to some current events and some current issues. I was going to talk to you about the education, Darvin, because you're strong on that.
Sure.
But you're from Kentucky, man, and we got to deal with this boy that you got in Kentucky and what needs to happen to him, because in the primaries, you guys had one polling place for 600,000 voters in Jefferson County and Louisville, which was absolutely stupid and ridiculous. And then for this man to come out and say that, oh, well, we mailed ballots to everybody, we wanted to make sure we were inclusive, and then we're going to shut that down and we're not going to do it again. What's happening there? Because Black folks are being disenfranchised. You got Breonna Taylor, that just the whole lies that were told by the Attorney General about the ballistics and everything else. If the New York Times is to be believed, that their own state, your own Kentucky state ballistics said that the Kenny, the boyfriend, did not shoot the police officer. So now, if that's the truth, that breaks the whole narrative. So collectively, about the voting that you guys have to do there, and get rid of that jackass that's in there as a what's his name, Mitch McConnell. Yeah, that's right. I'm going to say it again, people. Forgive me, but he's a jackass. So how do we get rid of him, and what do we do?
Well, again, one of my favorite words is holistic. I tend to look at things, especially the experiences of Black people in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Kentucky is not a state; it's a Commonwealth, and I promise you, Kelly, the wealth is not common.
Oh, okay? I know it ain't. I know it isn't.
No. So what that means is, for the fact that voter suppression is still a very, very real reality for us in Kentucky, various forms, various ways, the way they treat you, the way they look at you, the decreased number of places that you can vote, the number of candidates that are and are not on the ballot, whereas our issues are concerned, along with the Breonna Taylor fiasco, which is just really, really, again, a very hurtful, very harmful thing for Black folk and people in Jefferson County. They're still protesting, that they're still going against the system in the streets and so on and so forth. And so it all ties into this notion, Kelly, that as Black people, we got work to do. And it doesn't really matter to me what your favorite thing is or what you like to do or what your favorite conversation is. I think if we're going to survive and thrive throughout these perilous times of bad politics, police brutality, racism, poverty, classism, patriarchy, so on and so forth, educational deficiencies, we're going to have to be committed, Kelly, to doing it well. And so, again, economics and education, they go hand in hand. And I think that whether it's a historical Black college and university or a liberal arts college in the western part of Kentucky or an all-white school, an all-black school. For me, it doesn't really matter, Kelly. I just think we need to make a commitment to being educated, period. We need to make a commitment to starting a degree program and finishing a degree program. We need to make a commitment to the Black community, to Black culture, the Black church, Black youth, Black elderly, Black politics, Black economics. We need to make sure, now I'm not saying be racist, I'm saying make sure that we are supporting the issues and the initiatives that continue to affect our people. If you like it, baby, I love it. But make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons.
Right.
And make sure that it is blackened,
Right.
blackened for the point of helping our people. There is a myriad, a plethora, a number, a mnemonic fatality of things that are hampering Black folk in the United States in 2020, just as they did in 1920, just as they did in 1820. The point is that we must make a point to go against injustice. Like John Lewis, let's get into good trouble. Stand up for something. Unite people. Be aware. New programs, funding. We must be committed to being educated, and we must be committed to establishing a firmer foundation of Black economics in our country, Kelly.
Absolutely. We must be committed to being Black and staying Black.
Yes, by all means.
Speaker Frierson, you got a whole bunch going on in Nevada. You got people coming to Nevada against COVID regulations. You got, no, not people. You got a test tube baby that comes up in there and defies every state law that you have, like he can do something like that. And then like it's no big deal, and infecting your whole state and community. Talk to me about your state. How is it working, and what will be the outcome come November?
Well, look, I mean, we have a president who's been on the attack. I think what's most important is that we not be afraid of standing up for the right thing. We not be afraid of recognizing that we have a responsibility here in Nevada, not only for our own citizens, but for our visitors who go back home to their states. So we're going to continue to do the right thing. We're going to continue to encourage and require social distancing and mask wearing, limitations on crowds. We have to continue to do that. I think that many of us have PTSD from 4 years ago and are concerned, and we should be concerned. We cannot take it for granted. We see what they've already done and continue to do to the courts. I believe that we will have a change in the administration come November. Here in Nevada, we expanded access to the polls to make sure that everybody could vote by mail, by drop off, or in person, so that they didn't have to risk their lives in order to participate in the electoral process. And we're going to continue to advance policies on social justice, making it clear. We banned the chokehold. We made it clear that you can record police in the course of their duties. I believe that we have to have collaborative, open communication with our community stakeholders about social justice. And I think law enforcement clearly has to be at the table and get buy-in. We can't legislate morals and values, but we can create an atmosphere where police are recruited and trained to recognize these challenges and incorporate it in how they do their jobs. They are professionals, and we should give them the tools that they need and then hold them accountable as professionals. And that's what we're doing here in Nevada. I think we need to do it across the country. Most importantly, we need to show up and show out here in the November election. And then I think we can get back to work once we have some, I think, responsible statesmanship in the White House.
And I also want to acknowledge Speaker Frierson, as at one point earlier last year, Nevada was the only state with both African-American speaker and African-American Senate president. One of only two states that ever did that. That was Nevada and Colorado. So I wanted to acknowledge that as well. Sharon, California is a blue state, but it has its pockets. And quite honestly, some of those pockets in Congress need to be eradicated. And what are you guys doing there? Because I know that there's some suppression going on even in California. What's happening there?
That's right. Yeah. So yes, there is voter suppression in California, and even though California has a reputation for being a liberal state, that liberalness is limited to Los Angeles County and San Francisco area. But the vast majority of the state is a red state. So what we've been doing here is working hard. Mostly my work is limited to the progressive movement, getting people to vote for Joe Biden believe it or not, there are a lot of progressives here in Southern California who do not want to vote for Joe Biden. We need to understand the danger that Trump presents and come together and vote for Joe Biden. So that's the effort that's going on here in California.
And let me say something to the progressives, not necessarily to you personally, but to the progressive itself. I need to understand, and maybe you can answer that question and briefly. Help me understand why what you guys are hearing is the radio broadcast. It's going to go through a countdown, but it will still record and play, so we're fine. But help me understand why there is so much animus against Biden compared to Trump. Now, I can understand why you may not want to vote for Biden, but what I don't understand is why you're questioning not voting for Biden and leaving Trump in, given that what he's already done, especially given the courts, and even this pandemic. Briefly, can you tell me about that over the talking, the minutes that you're going to hear from the radio broadcast?
Yeah, so most of the progressives that are vehemently against Joe Biden, they are not supporters of Trump.
Right, but they're not.
They mostly come from privilege. So they will not experience the kinds of treatment that Black and brown people get. So what I'm seeing for the most part are young people of privilege who are taking an unwavering stand. They wanted Bernie. I wanted Bernie. Mm-hmm. But I'm not willing to give up my vote and have just one more vote go to Trump. I will not be a snowflake in that avalanche. I will not be a part of that.
Right, exactly. So, Jamie, let me come to you and ask you. I didn't call you on for the current events and politics, but certainly we have to address it and deal with it. How do you see this impacting? Or well, let me ask you this way: the students that you deal with and you talk to, how are they thinking about this election? How are they seeing things happening, especially with the Black Lives Matter protests and the things happening? What's going through their minds and what are they saying?
Well, obviously there's a lot of disappointment and pain and re-traumatization, but there's a lot of empowerment as well. Students recognizing their own power to do something about it. Students have been eager to protest, have been eager to talk about doing things differently, have been eager to just lift their voices so that they're heard. I think the work we have to do, I remember this in 2016, so many, this is when I was at Paul, so many of our Black and brown students were fearful when he was elected and did not understand how someone could lose the majority vote but still be the president. So there's still some more education we have to do, but I would say our students are extremely aware. Social media has definitely been a tipping point there, so that the information that they have in their hands is just incredible. And they're getting used to letting their voices be heard and using that as a medium as well. And so they just have access to so much information and to so many people who can be models for them around what activism can look like, whether it's creatively through spoken word or other kind of artistic forms, or really actually getting out in the streets. So we our teachers are trying to make sure they understand there is a pandemic, so we have to be safe about what we're doing, and trying to do some things virtually. But I would say there's a mix. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of frustration. Not understanding why things are the way they are. But still also a lot of hope that they can do something to make things different, and they're motivated to do so.
Good. Sheriff, as we close out every show, we always ask what's at stake. What's at stake for us socially, economically, and politically? And you in North Carolina, you guys have a battle going on for Tom Tillis' seat. You got a battle going on for just your position as sheriff. 8 new Black sheriffs in North Carolina. First time in the history that the 8 of you were elected. 1 was reelected, I believe. 2 women, first time sheriffs, 1 reelected. And then the state tried to take away your powers because you're all Black. They tried to reduce your pay. because the state legislature is run by Republicans, but you have a Democratic governor now. So talk to us about what's at stake and all that's going on as brief as you can, but as powerful as you can. Let us know what's at stake for African Americans across the country, but right there in North Carolina.
Yeah, certainly. Kelly, Michael, you've heard me say this before. Our life is at stake. And we've seen this play out over the past few months with this pandemic and what this White House administration is doing and how they are defying the science, defying the scientists, and holding these rallies and pushing these false narratives. Our lives are at stake. And here in North Carolina, we've been attacked. The 8 African-American sheriffs who were elected in 2018, along with myself, represent the largest urban centers across North Carolina. We represent the most influential political centers in North Carolina. So to say they were pissed would be an understatement. So they came after us. They're still coming after us. But we're standing together. So I'll sum it up by saying, what I ran on as sheriff is what we have to do as law enforcement to really create this reform that we are pushing for. And all 8 of us here in North Carolina are pushing for this. And that's transparency, engagement, and accountability. If we don't put that back in the profession of law enforcement, we're doomed. We've lost community trust. We've lost the ability for people in Black and brown neighborhoods to talk to us, build those relationships to help us combat crime. You know, I'm a student of Sir Robert Peel.
Right.
Police are the community, community are the police. It takes all of us. Police, by and large, 18,000 agencies across the country. A lot of good men and women put on the badge every single day. We have to identify the bad ones. We have to hold them accountable. We have to prosecute them when they break the law. And that's the way we start rebuilding trust and really creating criminal justice reform and building community. My final word, vote.
Mr. Perry, I want to thank you for joining me again, my brother. What's at stake for us?
I echo what the sheriff just said. Not only our lives, but our grandkids and our children. Economically, for African American people, our healthcare, educational systems across the country. I have challenged my entire family, and I come from a large family, making sure all my nieces and nephews vote who are old enough to vote. I'm making sure my wife and I are engaged in getting even making sure seniors get out and vote as much as we can. We cannot afford another 4 years of Trump administration.
No, we can't.
We just cannot afford it.
Jamie, let me come back to you. What's at stake?
Oh, everything. Generational hope, our pure existence, and I think humanity is at stake. I think there's a generation at this point that is ready to do something different, something we've never done before. And I'm ready to just allow our young people to lead the way in this and for us to support them. It's time. So yeah, there's a whole lot at stake.
Darvin, Dr. Adams, what's at stake for us?
Well, Kelly, I'm assuming that you asked the question of what's at stake. I'm guesstimating that you understand that something of value, something of importance, certainly is at stake. I'll repeat what the young lady before me just said. I think our existence as Black people, the body of Jesus Christ, the Black church, the community, I think our entire existence, holistically speaking, is at stake, not only with this upcoming election, but in terms of what will go on with us in our communities over the next 1 to 5 to 10 years. I think it's of the utmost importance that we pay close attention to our environment, pay close attention to our communities and our neighborhoods. Most importantly, I think we must pay close attention to the direction of racism and call it for what it is: structural evil, damaging, harmful, unnecessary harm done to Black folks, innocent Black folks. I think we need to be stronger than ever. I also believe there's a theoretical middle ground between Minister Malcolm L. Shabazz X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. especially where Black poverty is concerned. There are some prophets out there. There are some preachers who are not concerned about prosperity, but are actually concerned about the present day status of Black people without worshiping the images of money. Our livelihood, our existence, our future, our children, our grandchildren, Kelly, everything is at stake in this upcoming election and the few years to come.
Sharon, what's at stake for us, dear?
Well, our immediate existential threat is that we have a president who's indicated that he is not supporting a peaceful transfer of power. He has access to perhaps 18,000 law enforcement people. He's already indicated, well, we already know that he doesn't respect the law. He paid $750 in taxes in 2016 and zero taxes in 10 out of the last 15 years. So unless we have a huge landslide on November the 3rd, there's no telling what can happen. So what's at stake is truly, we're truly in crisis. We must have a landslide.
Speaker Frierson.
Thank you. Look, I agree with what everyone before me has said, but the only thing that I'll say in addition to that is democracy as we know it is at stake. We are at a pivotal fork in the road where we can stop the momentum of hate and the kind of destructive rhetoric that's going to leave us much worse off for generations. Now is the time to stop it and stop the momentum, send a message that we have to be statesmen, we have to return to democracy, we have to make sure that every voice is heard and valued, and all of that is going to be dictated by what happens.
I want to thank my guests. I want to thank Speaker Jason Frierson. I want to thank Professor Sharon Kyle. I want to thank Mr. Bernard Perry. I want to thank Jamie Dunham. I want to thank Sheriff Birkhead. And also I want to thank Dr. Adams.
Love you.
Thank you, man. Darvin Adams, Dr. Darvin Adams out of Kentucky. And then also I want to thank you. Especially you who come in and join us and hang out with us for this session this time, because as some of the comments here of the panelists are, they've appreciated the discussion, they've liked the discussion, and I thank you and thank them for the discussion. But what's at stake for us right now is exactly what each and every one of them said. It's our livelihood, it's our democracy, it's our foundation, but we have to think of it as Professor Dr. Adams said. Our Blackness and everything about us being Black is at stake right now. And everything that we do and how we do it, why we do it, where it's coming from is at stake. I need you to think about it back if you were back in 1920, 1960, 1980. I mean, the reality of it is that we're in 2020 and we're still facing and dealing with the same things we dealt with 50, 60, 100 years ago. We're still having the same fight. We're still fighting for the right to vote. It's 2020. So you can only imagine what can happen under another 4 years of this test tube baby. I've said it before, I'll say it again. He's a threat to us. He's a threat to all of us, Black, white, yellow, and brown. But you always know that it affects us worse than anybody else. It's time for the Black reset. You've seen that hashtag. I want you to start hashtagging it out, tweeting it out, Instagramming it out, Facebook it out. Hashtag the Black reset. It's time for us to reset as a community, as a culture, as a people. And we have to do so, as I said earlier in my opening. We have to buy up 100 acres, 200 acres. We have to get with friends and family and buy land, build our own communities, and do what we got to do. But short of that, we got to make sure we vote. And not just vote and go back home, but we got to vote and go to the city council meeting. We have to vote and go to the state legislature meeting. We got to vote and go to the congressional meetings. We have to vote because we got to make sure the policies that get put in place don't impact and affect us. And not only that, we got to make sure we respond to the census, because that census is going to determine what state legislatures are able to do with the $850 billion that are going to come to our communities from 2021 to 2030. Those 10 years is going to be money coming into our communities, and we got to make sure we get that money. If we don't respond to the census, when someone knocks on your door, open the door and say, what do you want? I'm checking to see if you did your census. No, I didn't. Here's my name. Here's how many people live in a house. This is what you got to do. It must be done. There's no time for BSing. There's no time for jacking off. There's no time for playing around. There ain't no time for Xbox. It's time to get serious about what's real. 35 days from now, there's going to be a reality check. And you got to ask yourself, what's your reality? Are you going to deal with what we've dealt with the last 4 years? Or are you going to make a change and fight for it? The other thing I'm going to tell you is get your guns. You better go out and buy some guns. I've said it before. I'm going to say it again. Buy your guns. Even if you don't want to, buy your guns. Because guess what? They're going to have theirs. And when the shooting starts, you might be in your house, but as we found out in Kentucky, bullets go through walls. So get your guns. Do the Black Reset. I want you, if you're going to join me, I want you to I want you to text TBR, the Black Reset, TBR, lowercase TBR 20, TBR 20, space, first name, space, last name, and space email. To text it to 59769. So I want you to text TBR 20, a space your first name, a space your last name, and a space your email address to 59769. We're about to do a national outlet of the Black Reset because on November 3rd, it's about us. I want to thank my guests. Thank them for joining me again. I want to make sure that everyone understands the Black Reset is happening now. We have to reset the narrative. We have to reset the discussion. We have to reset the policies. We got to reset the education. We got to reset the economic system. We have to reset it so we can take advantage of it. And we have to reset it so that we are not forgotten. The Black Reset.
That's right.
THEBLACKRESET. The Black Reset at 59769. Give me your first name, your last name, and your email address with spaces in between, and TBR 20 tonight. Do it right now. Text it to us, and we'll see you next week, as I'm going to have probably the Republican director of the North Carolina, the North Carolina Republican Party. Ooh, that's going to be a doozy for them, boy. I can't wait. But again, I want to thank all my guests for joining us. I want to thank you for joining us. And like I say anytime, if it's social, economic, or political, it's Black Politics Today. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And hey, let's get out there and let's make sure we vote. As I said, November 3rd,
Yes, sir.
It's about us.
Thank you for listening to Black Politics Today on Eye for What's at Stake in Global Politics with your host, Kelly Michael Williams. Join us live each Monday from 7 to 8 p.m. Until next time, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and download us on iTunes at Black Politics Today.